Well, good evening. Glad that you're able to be with us tonight. If you remember, as Moses was up on Mount Sinai with the Lord, he didn't eat or drink for 40 days, 40 nights. In the presence of God, it would seem that he did not need that food. And then he came down, broke the tablets, and then he went right back up. And again, for 40 days, 40 nights, he did not eat or drink. What a phenomenal thing. As he was up on the mountain, if you remember, God gave him the 10 commandments. And with those, he gave him a description of the way that he demands that his people act, behave, rules and regulations that they are to follow. With that, he also coupled the way that they are supposed to worship him, what he demanded. And with that, he talked about the tabernacle. And in the tabernacle, we see a description that is vivid to the imagination, that is so elaborate and very, very centric, exaggerated in all of its beauty. And it was certainly something that would have been a beauty to behold. Well, along with the description of what the tabernacle was supposed to look like, how they were supposed to worship, he mentions two people in Exodus chapter 31, Bezalel and Oholiab. Both of these guys mentioned in conjunction with making the tabernacle. I've often wondered, and maybe you have too, but I've often wondered about the weight that these two guys felt as they began to craft the things that were going to be in the presence of God. Now, again, fresh on their minds is the presence of God. No doubt that loud trumpet blast that they heard from Mount Sinai, no doubt the storm and the tempest that was around Mount Sinai, no doubt the thundering voice of God, and no doubt the exodus from Egypt, the destruction of Pharaoh and his army. And here are these guys who are commissioned, listen to me, by God to make for God a place of worship. That weight has to be phenomenal. I want to look at, and there's a few things that we can draw from them, the way that they handled this particular job, that I wanted to look at this evening in the time that we have together. These guys, undoubtedly extraordinary craftsmen, and excellently skilled in what they have been asked to do. Read with me the first. Let's look at the first 11 verses here in Exodus chapter 31. Let's just get this under our belt, and we'll all be on the same page. The Lord said to Moses, "See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, to make in every craft. And behold, I have appointed with them Oholiab, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan. I have given to all able men ability that they may make all that I have commanded you. the tent of meeting and the ark of the testimony and the mercy seat that is in it, and all the furnishings of the tent, the tables and its utensils, the pure lampstands and its utensils, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering with all its utensils, and the basin, the stand, and the finely worked garments, the holy garments for Aaron, the priest, and the garments for his sons for their service as priests, and the anointing oil and the fragrant incense for the holy place. According to all I have commanded you, they shall do. Do you see that list? There are very few things in this life that I am even adequate at, right? I mean, subpar at best. These guys, I mean, it to me reading it, I'm just so impressed. The design, gold, silver, bronze, stone, wood, and here we have thrown in the mix, they're sewing too. Like, this is incredible. But I want to bring to our attention a few lessons that we need to learn from them. And the first one is that we need to use our talents. I mean, this is a softball, y'all. This is this is a no-brainer. Use your talents. Here are these guys, and he said, and God said, I have filled them with, you go back to verse 3 and verse 5, 3, 4, and 5. I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, cutting the stone, setting, and the carving wood to make, for setting in the carving of wood to make in every craft. It's incredible. No doubt they use their talents. You know, if you go naturally, maybe in your mind, you're thinking about Matthew chapter 25, where Jesus tells us this parable about these guys with talents. The master's going away. He leaves one with five, leaves one with two, leaves one with one. Now, what do you do with the talents? Well, the one with five makes 10, the one with two makes four, and the one with one buries it. You know, God doesn't ask, when we think about using our talents, God doesn't ask us to do extraordinary things. God doesn't even ask us to do anything out of what we are familiar with. Do what you can with what you have, right? I mean, this is, he gives you 5 talents. Well, use those 5 talents. He gives you 2 talents. Well, use those 2 talents. He doesn't ask you to use 7 or 15. There's a lot of biblical examples of people who had talents and who used their talents. But I want to look at 3, or at least propose 3, to help us discover our talents. Because I don't think the problem is that people, this is my opinion, I don't think the problem is that people don't want to work or want to do something. They just don't know what to do. Well, I can't tell you what you're good at, and I can't tell you what God's blessed you with, but I can look at 3 examples of people and how they discovered their talents. The first one is Ezra. Now, in Ezra, we know a little bit about him. He was a priest, all right? And he is a good example of someone who looked around him at what he could do. He just took a 10,000-foot view of what's around me. Naturally, he's a priest. He is surrounded by God's people and religion in general. He is surrounded by the most religious and the most well educated. Well, what can I do to help the situation? So, guess what? He became a scribe. Doesn't that make sense? Isn't that a logical leap to take? Use your talents. Look around you. What is around you that I can utilize to help God? Another fella, David. This is a guy who used his talents in maybe one of the most dramatic ways that we're familiar with is in killing Goliath, right? You remember his conversation with Saul before he went into battle. I think, at least in my mind, that's the whole key to the whole situation. Because he went to King Saul and King Saul, what are you doing? He said, the Lord saved me from the lion and the bear, and the Lord will save me from this uncircumcised Philistine. What did David do? He looked back. What is in my past that perhaps has led me to this point? What can I use in my past to help me right now in the present? I tell you, if a lot of us just look back, well, what have I done already that I can do right now, do again? I think it would help. I don't know how David killed the lion. I don't know how he killed the bear. I've often wondered, did he do it with a slingshot? I think he was pretty good with it either way. But I'm confident that he remembered. He looked back. What have I already done that's going to help me right now, that I can use right now? Or, that's looking around Ezra, looking back David, and looking forward, you think about maybe Mordecai. In the story of Esther, God's providence throughout. But there's one statement that has always resonated with me in the book of Esther in chapter 4. You remember the statement by Mordecai when he encourages Esther to go to the king. Mordecai makes that statement, looking forward. God will save his people. God will deliver them. You remember that? So when we think, just thinking about that, we know the plan, we know what God is going to do. How can I participate in that plan? That's what Mordecai is thinking. Esther, you're in a perfect position. We know this is what God is going to do. God is going to help his people. God is going to deliver his people. Participate in God's plan. I think that's great ways perhaps to help us discover, at least begin to dissect our own lives. Whether you're looking around at what can I do right now, or looking back, what have I already done, or maybe looking forward. Hey, I want to be a part of God's plan. Think about it. But these guys, Oholiab and Bezalel, they used their talents. Ezra, David, Mordecai, a whole host of other Bible characters used their talents. In order to be effective in the work of God, we have to use our talents. I know that's a no-brainer. Another thing that they did, this is in verse 6, they delegated responsibility. You have a daunting task in front of you of what you have to do, what God has asked you to do. Listen, you can't do it alone. Delegate. They delegated responsibility, and you see it throughout. But it's mentioned here first in verse 6. And behold, I have appointed with Bezalel, with him Oholiab, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan, and I have given to all able men ability, that they may make all that I have commanded you. Here's an interesting thought. God gave them ability, but God gave them ability for a specific purpose, right? God gave them ability to follow his commands. Delegated responsibility. Moses delegated responsibility. You remember that in Exodus chapter 18. Moses, how are you at Jethro? Came to Moses. Moses, how are you able to bear such a burden of these people? Million, maybe 2 million people following you. And he was sitting every single day, all day long, listening to their problems, judging them. So the rest of the story, Moses appointed heads over thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens. He delegated responsibility. Even Jesus delegated responsibility, didn't he? In Luke chapter 6, Jesus sends out 72 there. In Luke chapter 10, or in Luke chapter 6, rather, is the 12 that are chosen. And then in Luke chapter 10, rather, it is those that are called the apostles. And Paul. The interesting thing about Paul, and we think about Paul, at least in my mind, I often think about Paul as this lone ranger, right? The lone ranger on the missionary frontier, and he is gung-ho and he's getting everybody. But as you look at the close and the end of Paul's life in 2 Timothy chapter 4, beginning in verse 9, there are 5 men that Paul has delegated responsibility to. Moses didn't do it by himself. Jesus didn't do it by himself, and neither did Paul. Why on earth would we think that church work needs to be done by ourselves? Burnout. We've all experienced burnout. Burnout happens for 2 reasons. 2 reasons. It happens because we don't ask for help, and it happens because we forget why we are doing what we're doing. If we remember we are like Bezal and Oholiab, if we remember that we are working for the very God, the creator of the universe. I'm not working for Johnny and Sue over here and trying to make them happy. I'm working for God. And if we remember to ask for help, because that's why the church was created, I don't think burnout will exist. Here's an interesting point, and one that we need to make when we think about Oholiab and Bezalel, is that their work was within the parameters that God has set. God had specific instructions for them, and they stuck to those instructions. At the end of verse 11, it says, according to all that I have commanded you, they shall do. According to all that I have commanded you, they shall do. Moses worked within the parameters of God. Here he is leading all the people, but he still said, Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 2, don't add to it, don't take away from it. Working within the parameters of God. Jesus even worked within the parameters of God, right? Here he is in Matthew chapter 26 as he's in the garden praying. Remember, Father, not my will, but yours be done. He was working within the parameters of God. Do I think I'm better than Jesus? Cain, Nadab, and Abihu, Korah, or Dathan and Abiram, and King Saul. What do all those people have in common? Cain, Nadab, and Abihu, Dathan and Abiram, and Korah's rebellion, and King Saul. Every single one of those people was worshiping or serving God in the wrong way. Every single one of those people paid the price for worshiping God in the wrong way. And we live live in a religious world where it is whatever you want, whatever is going to make you happy. If there's a message that needs to be preached, it is God has given you parameters. Fill your responsibility within the parameters. When you go outside of what God has asked, you pay the price. And nothing's ever changed. Oholiab and Bezalel, and with the great weight and responsibility that was on them, they fulfilled what God asked them to do. Here's a greater weight and a greater responsibility, at least in my humble opinion, that is laid with on each one of us. It's our destination. Where's your soul going to be? On Judgment Day, what's God going to say to you? Depart from me, I never knew you? Or is he going to say, enter into the joys of heaven? If you're not ready for judgment, won't you get ready as we stand and as we sing?